I guess,
Thanks for coming, everybody. Happy snowy Saturday. But thank you for bringing the weather to be with us here today. We're so excited to have Muscle Bill talking today and sharing his story. It's been pretty awesome to have Bill here, and
Thanks.
I am so glad that he made the call to one day, like, I'm just down the street. We should probably do something with that. So it's just transformed the community downstairs. So it's been pretty incredible. And
Thanks,
so excited to hear you talk today.
Thanks.
Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming out. I know the weather's not quite perfect. So, Cannon, how's it going? Huge thanks to Devin and Paige, Studio 410, for having me out. Without you guys, I don't have a place to speak, so thank you for letting me represent the gym. When I'm preparing for these, I try to think about myself as if I'm sitting in the audience watching myself speak, and try to consider what would I be thinking if I was sitting there. So I figured I'd be thinking, all right, who is this guy? Why is he standing up there talking? And what is it he's trying to say? So luckily this is Teeswater, and you all know who I am for the most part. So Bill Elliott, right? Richard Elliott's son, Muscle Bill, whatever. And why am I up here speaking? Basically, I'll rewind a little bit. There was about 3 years ago, I kind of observed that I wasn't experiencing any kind of joy in my life. And so I thought, all right, if I want to be happy, which I wasn't at the time, I thought joy seems like a pretty important thing, so maybe I'll start there. So I started to think about, where is it that I would even get joy from, right? What am I not doing that I could otherwise feel these things? And so that kind of led me down the path of realizing that I want to help people. So as with a lot of people, all right, let's start there. So historically, I've been lifting weights for about 15 years, and over the years I've been able to help a lot of people in the gym, my friends, my family, a lot of strangers, and really just help them with wherever they're stuck at. So I thought, all right, well, maybe I want to be a personal trainer. Seems logical. But I kind of realized that I don't particularly like cultivating that lifestyle of working out, or like finding that drive to go to the gym and eat better and all these things. But what I really like to do is find people who are frustrated, they're going to the gym, they're hit a plateau, and they don't know how to get past it. So oftentimes I'm able to come in, can make a couple changes, a little bit of technique and setup stuff, as a lot of you know, right? And we have these like light bulb moments. People instantly, they're like, holy shit, this is gonna make a difference in my training and help me get to the next spot. So that's what I love to do. And so I thought, all right, how can I go about doing that? But when I continued thinking about that, I started to think about, well, maybe I can apply the same concept sort of laterally into the psychology of things. So over my life, I've spent over 30 years in and out of the hospital. And over that time, I've been able to meet a lot of people who are going through some of the hardest stuff that they've ever dealt with, right? Sometimes they're at home one day, next day they wake up in the hospital, they don't know what's going on, how long they're gonna be there, or if they're coming home. So with a lot of these people, I've had conversations, and as I'm speaking to them, I can really see it in their body and hear it in their language. I can just tell that the conversation we're having is really making a difference, like immediately. And so it's really the same light bulb moments that I'm experiencing in the gym. So ultimately, that's why I'm here today. I want to have a bit of a conversation, share my story, and see if ultimately I can make some kind of difference in somebody here, okay? So this first bit's going to have a bit of medical terminology. I'm going to do my best to explain it. It's kind of second nature to me, but break it down, simplify, and hopefully it all makes sense. And if anybody has any questions, I encourage take out your phone, write them in a note or something. I don't mind. And just ask at the end, okay? Sound good? Everybody nod, okay. So when I was 15 months old, my parents found 2 orange stripes on one on my knuckle, one on my ankle. And they just figured, my sister's a year older than me, so she probably just colored on me with a marker. So a couple weeks later, these stripes were still there, and so we went to the doctor. The doctor had no idea what they were from. So we did some blood work and skin biopsies and that kind of thing. A couple weeks later, we ended up back to the doctor again, sat down, and he said, all right, Mr. and Mrs. Elliott, your son has a rare genetic condition called homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. which basically means his body doesn't remove cholesterol from the bloodstream. Patients with this condition oftentimes require a heart and liver transplant, have a life expectancy of approximately 3 to 10 years of age, and there's one form of treatment available. It's called plasmapheresis, but it's never been done on a child of his age or size. Do you want to start treatment, yes or no? So my parents decided, okay, let's try this treatment, but in order to get plasmapheresis, you need access to the vascular system. So basically in children, most commonly they use these things called central lines. It's basically a plastic tube. Mine had 2 ends on it. There's one to draw the blood out of the body, cycles through the machine, and gives it blood back to me. Okay, so typically these are inserted under the skin of the chest, it's fed up into the jugular, down to the superior vena cava, and they give you direct access to blood at the heart. So 17 months old, I get my first central line. We go down to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. I get my first plasmapheresis treatment, and it worked. So over the next bunch of years, my dad and I would go to Toronto once every 2 weeks. I get my plasmapheresis, and life was pretty good. With the nature of central lines, I had a lot of problems with blood clotting. There's constantly blood going through there. And I had a lot of problems with infection in my skin here, where they come out. So I had, over a dozen central lines over the years, and they would last anywhere from as little as 1 day up to the longest as 7 years. So otherwise, my health was pretty good. Up until the spring, I was 7, turning 8. I went and saw my cardiologist, had an angiogram, and the results came back that the right side of my heart was 90% blocked. The left side of my heart was 75% blocked. So on May 31st, 1994, I became the youngest kid in North America to have a triple bypass surgery at the time. So fortunately, it all worked out. I was in the hospital for 7 days, went home, recovered, went back to school in the fall. Sorry to my teachers. It was probably pretty stressful. But otherwise, life was good. So Dad and I, we started going to Toronto once a week because obviously every 2 weeks wasn't enough. And that leads me to the next summer. I was 9, and as luck would have it, I got whooping cough. So that landed me down in Sick Kids Hospital for 5 weeks. And during that time, they discovered this other condition I had. It's called superior vena cava syndrome. So basically, the superior vena cava, as I said, the central lines all feed into there. And over the years, because I'd had so many problems, my superior vena cava had scarred completely closed. Okay? And what that means is basically the main drainage point for blood to come down from my head doesn't have any blood flowing through it. So they said, okay, well, what we can do, we can put this thing in, it's called a shunt. So it's basically, if you imagine this piece of Play-Doh, you push a straw through the middle, and that allows some blood to come through and helps blood come down from my head. So I went for surgery, but they realized that the blockage in my SVC, it was too tall, and it was up too high. So if they were to put this shunt in, I wouldn't be able to move my head. So, hey, and basically, that meant they couldn't do anything for me. So they said, basically, sorry about your luck, but there's nothing we can do. So what that means is superior vena cava syndrome inherently comes with some potential complications. So things like vision loss, severe headaches and migraines, or even brain hemorrhaging and stroke. So 9 years old, I get the second diagnosis, and otherwise, life is good. And so over the next bunch of years, I was fortunate in that I was young enough, my body adapted, and I grew new veins in my upper body. So my upper chest and neck has a whole forest of stuff that's not supposed to be there, but fortunately for me, it allowed blood to come down from my head again. So the superior vena cava syndrome didn't really cause a lot of problems. Over the next bunch of years, it brings me to my teenage years, started exercising. Started riding my bike, lifting weights, going to Aunt Deb's, using the York weight machine, and really started to kind of find that muscle building path that I was eventually get into. Around the same time, I switched from Sick Kids Hospital down to New Victoria in London because obviously I was getting older and Sick Kids doesn't treat adults. So when I switched to London Hospital, I got a new set of doctors, and the new doctor said, all right, we need to address this issue of a central line. So because my superior vena cava is completely scarred closed, I couldn't receive any more central lines. So without a central line, I can't get plasmapheresis. Without plasmapheresis, I'm dead. So I switched to London. Doctor says, all right, we have these things called AV fistulas. And this is an alternative method of treatment for plasmapheresis. So basically what that means is they surgically insert a vein into an artery, and the blood pressure from the artery blows the vein up. So they have opposing blood pressure. The venous system is a low pressure system, right? And so the artery expands so they can access it with needles. So over my later teenage years, I had 2 fistula surgeries that failed. The third one, it was a success. And if you're wondering what a 15-year-old's fistula looks like, it's right there. And it's a little bit fucking gnarly, right? But it works. And when I was 19 years old, it was the first time in my life I didn't have a plastic tube come out of my chest. Yeah, you remember that. Damn near drowned. So, yeah. Unfortunately, after that surgery, I sat down with the doctor and he said, all right, as long as you have this thing in your arm, you can't lift more than 50 pounds. And so at the time, like I said, I was getting into exercise, and I said, all right, I understand what you're telling me. I respect your opinion, but we're going to see about that. So obviously that fall, I went to Fanshawe College, and the first thing I did was join the gym. I started lifting weights 5 nights a week, 2 hours a night, and get ripped or die trying, 200 pounds at 10%. That was my goal. I lived and breathed it, right? I loved it. Unfortunately, my health kind of cooperated for a bunch of years. So over my 20s, I did a lot of bodybuilding style training. Until I was about 27, I found myself living in Kitchener, and I introduced myself to this gym called Lil's Gym. And it was the first time in my life I was ever exposed to this stuff called strength training, powerlifting. So obviously I walked in, I said, all right, I got to do this. And I started on my first strength program. So over my later 20s, I competed 3 times in powerlifting, the third of which was June of 2016, where I hit a 405 squat, a 315 bench, and a 545-pound deadlift. And yeah, you know, that was a big day for me in a lot of ways. Like, it was on Father's Day, and Dad came down. We were in Brantford, and he drove down, cheered me on, and to videotape everything. And not only that, but I shared the platform with my coach at the time and a whole room full of people who I considered to be my peers, but probably more cool for me is they considered me to be their peer, right? I'm this guy, maybe shouldn't be lifting weights. I'm in this room full of powerlifters, and they're all like happy I'm there, right? So when I stood on the platform and locked down with that 545, it was the biggest fuck yeah moment of my life. There's no way to explain it, but experience it. But like, it makes the hair on my arm stand up when I think about it. And unfortunately, going into that meet, I knew powerlifting wasn't really a sustainable thing for me. So I decided, all right, if I can't get stronger, I'm going to go back and just get more jacked. So that's what I did. I got in the best shape of my life. And that brought me into the end of 2016. On Christmas morning, I woke up that year, and for some reason, I just had this feeling in my body, and I knew that I wouldn't be alive next Christmas. There's no, test results or anything to tell me that. I just had this feeling in my stomach that something's going to happen, and this is basically it. So, as I mentioned at the start, I started evaluating it. I made this observation that I'm not happy with my life. So if this is my last year, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be around? And in thinking about that, I decided, all right, I'm going to move to Kingston, be closer to my brother. I want to walk along the waterfront. And that's really all I knew. So I started making changes. That spring, so 2017, I went and saw my cardiologist, and he said, all right, all the tests show that everything's normal. No changes in the last 5 or 6 years. So we'll see you next year. And I kind of said, like, I don't know how to tell you this, but something's wrong. And so he said, okay, well, are you still going to the gym? And I said, yeah, thanks for noticing. I'm still lifting weights for sure. And he was like, okay, well, do you ever see stars when you're at the gym? And I said, oh yeah. Like, literally every day I see stars when I'm at the gym for sure. And he said, okay, do you ever feel lightheaded when you're lifting weights? And I said, sometimes, not as much, but yeah. And he said, well, what about, do you ever feel like you're going to pass out when you're lifting weights? And I said, well, no, I've never felt like I was going to pass out ever. And so he said, okay, well, if you do feel like you're going to pass out, don't. Because with the condition of your heart, you won't wake up. So I said, all right, it's simple enough. I'll pay attention and carried on. So I moved to Kingston, joined the new gym, started the new job, and found myself 4, 5, 6 nights a week. I would walk along the waterfront at sunset, and I really started to feel more at peace, if you will. And I don't know, as much as my health was deteriorating, I started to feel better until one day I got off work. I went to the Good Life parking lot. I got out of my car to grab my gym bag, and the world went black. So fortunately, I had my one hand on my door handle. I threw my other arm up on the roof of my car, and I caught myself. And it's funny, people talk about your life flashing before your eyes, but when I was standing there, all I heard was my cardiologist. He said, if you ever feel like you're going to pass out, don't, because you're not going to wake up. And so I thought, okay, this is what he was talking about. So I can't pass out. So I started to slow my breathing, and I really started just repeating that in my head, like, you can't pass out, you can't pass out. And fortunately, I didn't. And so I stood up eventually. I got my hearing back, my vision came back, and I kind of sat in my car, and I thought, holy shit, that was just about it, But then I thought, all right, I'll be damned if I'm going to die in the parking lot at the gym. I'm going in to do my workout. So I went in and did my rack pulls, and I said, fuck it, I'm doing 475 today. So anyways, it all went well. And the next day at work, I emailed my doctor, and I said, all right, last night, something happened, and I need to see you right away. So within about 2 weeks, I found myself admitted to the London hospital. I was down there, had a bunch of testing done. I was in there for 2 weeks. And at the end of that time, my heart surgeon-to-be came in. He sat down. He said, all right, Mr. Elliott, you have severe aortic stenosis. So basically what that means, your aorta is kind of like the exit hallway to your heart, and your aortic valve is kind of like the door. So all the blood that pumps out of your heart goes through this valve. And for most people, your diameter is about a quarter, it's about 3/4 of an inch. Mine at the time was maybe the size of an eraser pencil, smaller. And so basically what that meant is that any time my heart beat, my valve could blow off and I dropped dead. So he said, I have an extreme risk of instant death. So that's what I was looking at. So I said, okay, well, what can we do about this? And he said, well, basically, we can go for surgery. If I can access your heart, I can probably repair or replace what needs to be done. But we don't have any way to know until we get there, because we can't get a clear enough image of your heart ahead of time. Alternatively, we can leave it, and eventually that's going to happen. You'll drop dead. And so I said, all right, well, obviously we'll go for surgery. And he said, okay, typically my wait list is 6 to 9 months, but with the condition of your heart, I don't think you're going to live more than about 8 to 12 weeks. So I need to get you in right away, and we'll be in touch. So that was at the start of September. November 21st, so about 10 weeks later, I went in for my pre-op appointment, and that time I was all ready to go. I was under the impression, we're getting there, right? We're just about ready to go. And so when I left the hospital on November 21st, I didn't hear from him for 6 months. So as you can kind of imagine, my life at that time pretty much fell apart. Started going to counseling, had an anxiety attack, and anyway, life got pretty shitty. But in my mind at the time, I didn't really care about a lot, because my whole focus was I just need to get to surgery. Because sometime I'll get a call, and sometime I'm going in. So as long as I make it to bed tonight, as long as I wake up tomorrow, we're just going to repeat that process. So everything, whatever's left when I get the surgery, I'll deal with this after. So I'm not saying that's a good mindset, but anyways, it's what I did. And basically, the biggest risk for my heart surgery wasn't necessarily the heart surgery itself, but as I mentioned with my severe vena cava syndrome, I have all these excess venous collaterals in my upper chest. And so I was fortunate over the years with my fistula pumping the blood backwards, all these veins were big, and they were able to handle the blood coming down from my head. But in order to have heart surgery, you need to cut through them. So there's a couple of risks there. The one being bleeding to death. As soon as you cut these open, they don't have any way to know how many veins are there or where they are. So as they go, they need to try and keep the bleeding under control. And secondarily to that, there's a relatively high risk that as soon as they cut through these veins, I'd have a stroke and die, because instantly I lose all the blood flow coming down from my head, and there's really nothing they can do about it. So that was kind of the big dilemma of surgery. But May 25th, 2018, I went into surgery, and 20 hours later, I came out. So a lot of you will remember that a lot better than I do, because I wasn't really alive. But it went well, I guess. During that time, my right lung collapsed. I got 67 units of blood product, and because of that, both of my kidneys had almost shut down. And because of that, I put on almost 50 pounds of fluid literally overnight. So when I woke up, my arms were so swollen that all the nerve endings in both of my arms were completely compressed, and I couldn't feel or move my arms. So there's some pictures around. Some of you might have seen them, but it was a little bit rough. But that whole time I told myself, as long as I wake up, I'll be fine. Because over the years, I just developed this confidence in all this shit happening all the time. Like, whatever condition my body's in, I'll figure that out. So, fortunately, that's the way it went. Now, just to kind of rewind, May 30th, 1994, I was admitted to Sick Kids Hospital on my 8th birthday for my first open heart surgery. So 24 years later, I found myself in the hospital again on my birthday. And so 2018, my birthday was on a Wednesday. And Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning, I remember I woke up, and it was 1:15 in the morning. And the reason I remember that is because up until then, I couldn't tell time anymore. So initially, I thought, all right, I'm only taking one extra strength Tylenol every 8 hours, so I'm not cloudy because of pain meds or anything. So maybe I've got brain damage. I just can't tell time anymore. But as a lot of you know, I'm late for things all the time anyway, so I wasn't particularly worried about it. But I woke up and I thought, holy shit, it's 1:15. But I was running a really high fever. So I called my nurse, and she came in and she said, you're not due for Tylenol until the morning, but I can get you a cold cloth and a nice cold drink. So I said, yeah, that sounds amazing, right? And so she went and came back, and I got her to help me into my chair beside my bed. And she set up this drink. She put this ginger ale and apple juice mixture into this ice cold cup. And she said, all right, here's the call bell. Let me know if you need anything or when you want to go back to bed. And so I said, all right, thank you. And so she left. I threw my gown off onto the floor because I was hot and uncomfortable, And so I'm sitting there with a cloth on my head, and I'm buck naked in this chair with tubes and wires everywhere, right? I have this cup in front of me, and I remember that I can't move my arms. So I kind of squeezed it with an oven mitt style to try and get this straw, And eventually I got this straw to my mouth when I had this drink, and it just changed my whole fucking life, And I sat back in my chair and I started laughing. And at the time, my roommate, he was this 88-year-old man. And the way our room was set up, my bed was on the right, there's a curtain, and then he was on the left. And I never saw him, but we talked every day and most nights because neither of us were really sleeping. But he heard me laughing. He said, hey, is everything okay over there? And I said, man, yeah, I'm doing great. I am. And he was like, oh, okay, what's going on? And I said, well, today's my birthday, and I'm 32, and I fucking made it. And he was like, well, happy birthday. It's good to have you here. And I sat back and I said, you know what? It is so good to be here. And it was really the first time that I had a light bulb moment that I thought about, maybe I don't quite think the same as a lot of people, right? Because here I am sitting in this chair. I can't feel my arms. I can't move. My lungs collapsed, all this stuff. And this apple juice just changed my world. I'm like, this is so good. I forgot about everything. And so about a week later, I was discharged, sent home. And I was told basically, you need to walk as far as you can, as many times a day. And at the time, I had a walker, so probably a lot of you saw me walking around town with Dad. And we put on a lot of miles that summer. But at the end of most days, I found my body would pretty much go into shock. I had a threshold, and I crashed pretty hard. So most nights, I found myself sitting in my recliner chair, had no lights on, no noise, no TV, no talking, no people. And I would sit there and I'd shake and cough and really just try to breathe. Like I said, my lung was collapsed, so I had to focus on expanding and training them again. And I really started to think about this concept of, why do I think a little differently than most people? And I was getting a lot of messages at the time about it's so crazy, all the stuff that you're going through and all these things that are happening, and I don't know how you do it. Like, how are you not terrified every day that all this stuff keeps happening? And it never really made any sense to me. And so, like I said, I started thinking about that, and I kind of came up with this analogy of an hourglass. So if you can imagine an hourglass, you got sand in the top, it's falling down to the bottom. We'll say it's falling down 1 grain at a time, okay? Now I want you to imagine yourself as a grain of sand within that hourglass. Where are you? I'm guessing you're probably near that top layer of sand. However much is in the top, you're likely near the top of that, right? Am I right? And I feel like that's because in life we feel like we have this concept of time to live this thing that we call life. And other circumstances aside, we're probably going to live until all this sand goes away, and then we'll fall, and that's it, right? But I realize that for me, when I picture myself in this hourglass, I see myself right near the bottom. Because my whole life, I've never really had time, right? Supposed to live 3 or 10 years. Let's see how it goes. So I'm not scared living down here, and it's just what I'm used to. But when people hear about the stuff that I've gone through, they picture themselves going from up top right down to the bottom. So no wonder it's terrifying. Like, no wonder you feel so anxious for me. And I get asked, how do you do it? And I said, well, just don't look down. Because ultimately, none of us know how much time we have. So what difference does it make how much sand is here, right? And so I want you to picture the hourglass again. And I want you to picture yourself within the hourglass. But this time, fuck the sand. Life isn't about sand. Life isn't about time, right? Life is our journey between this hourglass into the horizon. And life unfolds as we walk in that direction, right? We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's going to happen, but we find out as we move there. So these are kind of my thoughts in my chair over the course of that summer when I was recovering. Going into the fall, I was fortunate. I recovered a lot faster than they anticipated. I was back at the gym within 3 months. So very minimally, but I was able to return, and I started back at some stuff. Coming into 2019, I was feeling better, and I started, all right, I'm going to lift some more weights, try to gain a bit of muscle back, because I'd lost quite a bit. So anyways, I was able to set some goals for myself, started back into my routine, and got back to it. Until June 20th, last summer, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning with a fever, and 12 hours later, I was fully conscious in the back of an ambulance having seizures. So I got down to London Hospital. I was laying in the hallway because they didn't have a room for me. And eventually, I just blacked out on this stretcher. And so when I woke up, I was in a little room. My parents were there. 2 of my best friends were there. And the surgeon came in and she said, okay, well, we think you've got necrotizing fasciitis, which is basically flesh-eating disease. And so we need to operate immediately. She said, well, basically, we're going to cut into the skin of your pec, assess the tissue, and if it looks how we expect it will, we're going to cut it all away, because with neck fascia, it's all you can do. And if it's affected in through your shoulder, we're going to take off your arm, and basically, whatever's left, that's all you got. So I said, okay, signed the little paper, and about 15 minutes later, I was going in for surgery. Now, fortunately, obviously, I've got my arm, and I didn't have flesh-eating disease, but I ended up in the ICU for 2 weeks. And, it was a pretty rough stay for whatever reason that time. But I was able to get out and get home. And for whatever reason, it was the first time in my life I ever felt completely broken. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I've had a lot of procedures done. And this time wasn't particularly different than any other time. But for some reason, it just felt different. And if you can imagine yourself in a pitch black room, okay, all the walls being covered with light switches, and in there with you, you've got 25 or 50 of your closest friends and family, and they're all flipping on switches. They're all here to help. They're all here encouraging you and telling you everything's going to be all right. But at the end of the day, none of the light switches are working, so you're still living in darkness. So it doesn't matter how many people are in there with you, and that's basically how I felt. It's like, I have always had the biggest support network that anyone could ever dream of. Obviously, with all of you here today, my family has been behind me in everything. And even despite all that, I felt completely isolated and alone. Until one day, I got a message from my buddy Jay Nera. So a lot of you probably don't know who he is, but he's a strength coach, he's a power lifter, he's very philosophical. And he's a big proponent of the myth of Sisyphus, which is basically a story from mythology where this guy Sisyphus, he pushes a rock up a mountain for all of eternity, right? And then it rolls back down, and he has to push it back up. So I got this message from Jay, and he said to me, "Hey man, it looks like you've had a couple rough weeks, but just remember the myth of Sisyphus and to be grateful for the struggle." And this is a story that I was familiar with, and it kind of resonated with me for a long time. But for whatever reason, when I got this message from Jay, instantly my lights came back on. And I was able to realize the reason that I felt so lost at that time was when I came home to a different mountain. For a lot of years, basically through my whole 20s, my health was stable. I was very confident and comfortable with my struggle. I knew how tall the mountain was. I knew how far the boulder would roll. And I know that I can push it back up. But when I came home, and I didn't know how tall the mountain was, I felt lost. But what I remembered, I've been doing the same shit my whole life. And I'm really good at pushing that boulder. So all I need to do is dig into the ground and start pushing. And it doesn't matter how tall the mountain is or how far down I am, because I know I can push it. And so instantly, I just felt better. Right? But I was getting a lot of messages again from people like, "Don't you ever wonder why me? Why does this stuff keep happening to me?" And honestly, it's been kind of the opposite. I've been grateful that it's been me and not someone else that I love. I remember being young, being in the hospital, and I learned how to shuffle cards. I learned magic tricks. I used to play Nintendo. And now as an adult, some of the nurses are pretty cute. I don't have any of that. I don't have a nurse at home, right? So a lot of the stuff's not that bad. But I know that most people, when you're in the hospital, it's scary, right? It's uncomfortable. You don't know when you're going home. And for me, it's really not like that. So not to say that's not unpleasant, but absolutely when I'm sitting there, I'm just drinking my tea in the sunshine and with my ass hanging out of my gown, right? And it's all good. But I got a lot of questions about, don't you ever think about giving up? And honestly, it never crossed my mind. And I had a conversation with a buddy of mine this last summer about that. I didn't really realize that that's something that some people do. And not to say that, that's better or worse, but it just never crossed my mind. And it was a really interesting thought to me because, again, I got asked, why don't you just lay in bed all the time? Don't you ever feel like just sitting in front of the TV and giving up? And no, I didn't. So I found that interesting. And I started to think about why that might be. But I feel like over the years, as I said, I've developed this kind of confidence in myself to continue after all these things keep happening. And so when it's happening again, I don't find myself worried about, am I going to make it, or what's going on, or was this going to happen again? Because I know it's going to. But I know that I can get through it. As long as I wake up in the morning, I'm not going to give up. And that kind of relates to this thing about failure we talked about the other day, right? A lot of people, so in the gym, how many of us have failed at an exercise? Some type of running, push-ups, anything, right? We go to failure, and when we're done, how does that feel? Bad, but ultimately it feels good, right? Sometimes that's the whole goal of the workout. We come in expecting to fail because that helps us set new objective goals. But as soon as we step outside of these doors, we go home and we forget about that. But these same concepts are 100% applicable to other aspects of life, right? You go work or relationships, anything. You go until a point that you can't and you feel like you're failing. But for some reason, instead of being happy you showed up, you're excited that you pushed yourself, and you're excited to come back and try again, you think, well, what do I do now, right? I'm defeated. So I challenge you, the next time you find yourself feeling defeated, you find yourself failing outside of the gym, Just remember that. This is just another rep in another set, right? We can come back. The only time that we ever really fail is if we give up. So sometimes giving up might be the better option, but that's kind of a talk for another day. But for the most part, we can keep going as long as we choose to, right? So, like I said, I think removing that option to give up is really what's helped me. And just find the strength to keep going, right? I find a lot of strength in telling myself that as long as I choose not to give up, as long as I choose to keep going, then I'm not done. So, anyways, that's my recommendation, I guess you could say. So like I said at the start, kind of when I prepare for these, I try to think about myself as if I'm sitting in the audience and, think about what would I be thinking. So I figured probably by now I'd be thinking, all right, that's great. This guy's been through a bunch of stuff. He's come to all these realizations or whatever, but how am I supposed to deal with that? Like, what does that have to do with me? So I figured, okay, I'll put together a couple of maybe potential key takeaways and that might be able to help. So number one, fuck the sand, right? Let's stop staring at our feet, worrying about when the ground's going to fall out from underneath us, and just take a step. Our lives all happen as we step towards that horizon, right? Whether it's up or down, side to side, whatever, we just keep moving, then we don't worry about the rest. But when we do, remember, number two, we're not alone, right? You can ask for help. And just to prove that, being that this is Teeswater, if I was to stand here and tell you right now, Teeswater, I'm struggling. I'm dealing with this thing, I don't know what to do, and I need help. How many people in here are thinking to themselves, well, that guy's fucking weak? Right? Nobody. But that's the conversation most of us have with ourselves, right? We're sitting at home, we're having a hard time, we feel vulnerable, and we don't want other people to perceive us as being weak, right? So we don't ask for help. But ultimately, nobody's thinking that. So if you look to your left, you look to your right, I guarantee you're going to know somebody in this room. So the next time you find yourself thinking like, I can't ask for help, I don't want them to think that I'm weak. Look at that person and ask yourself right now, honestly, is that what they're going to be thinking? And the answer is no. So ask for help. We all have a network, okay? Even though it's hard to think of sometimes, just remember one person. It's all it takes. If they can't help, oftentimes they know someone else that can, right? But at the end of the day, number three, you can always set it down, right? We don't get stronger lifting weights. We get stronger after we set them down. So it's okay. We don't fail unless we decide to stop. So we can come back, right? You can take that break, rest, recover, get stronger, and come back and try again. But number four, remember that things don't always return back to how they used to be. I find a lot of times people, especially when they're going through hard times, they fight just to return back. They tell themselves, when I get back to doing the stuff that I used to do, I'll be happy. When I feel like I used to feel, everything will be better. The reality of it is, there's a pretty good chance that's never going to happen. Right? That's not good or bad. It's just a fact. One of the things we're guaranteed in life is change. So just try to consider, what can we do now? What do I have available to me now? There's 1,000 things in life that we can't do. You're going to waste a lot of time trying to think of them all. So just find one thing that we can do and take the win. Right? So, kind of close this out. Over the years, I've been fortunate enough that for whatever reason, whether it's, I don't know if it's energy or auras, or if it's this big smile on my face a lot of the time, but when I walk into a room, I'm hard to miss, and oftentimes I'm hard to forget. And so the next time you find yourself dealing with some hard and heavy shit, I want you to think back on today, and hopefully something helps you find strength. So, thank you. Now to stand up. you. I don't know. I don't know what to do with my hands. Now, did anybody write down any questions? I didn't see anybody. There's always crickets. Nobody has questions, and I even reminded you today.
I love the story of London with the male nurse being the only person in the whole ward that could actually walk to the washroom.
Oh yeah. So in the ICU last summer, for whatever reason, there's one room with a window, and the window is facing to the east. So every morning, the sun would come up, and I'd sit and eat my breakfast in the sunshine, right? But I was the only person in the ICU that was conscious, and for whatever reason, I got the window. But the one day that I had a male nurse, he came in, and I had to go to the bathroom. And at this point, I was able to walk again, so I walked down to the bathroom. So he took me down, helped me with my IV pole and stuff, go to the bathroom. When I came back, and what would you say, 200 feet maybe, at least? Anyways, I walked all the way down this hallway, past the nurse's station, past everybody, go to the bathroom, and I'm walking back. I'm like 10 feet from my room, and this older nurse comes running up. She's like, stop. And I'm like, oh shit, am I like bleeding? You know? And she's like, no, your gown's open. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And she's like, and the guy's like, oh yeah, I didn't even worry about that. But it was open the whole time I walked down, past the nurses, all the stations, literally the whole unit. And then I walked all the way back. And this guy's like, yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. Whatever. But I had a friend of mine actually came to visit me that day, and she was walking behind me. So I'm like, you didn't tell me either. She's like, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, it was funny. But I have a lot of experiences like that. Like I said, I have some fun in the hospital, you know. I don't know. Sometimes it's absolutely terrible, but I don't know. It's good. Anybody?
I think you should tell them about the night swimming the first time.
Yeah?
With Matt.
So, okay, 2 parts to that, actually. So the summer I was 19, I got that tube out of my chest. We went to Silver Lake, and I decided, all right, I'm going to go swimming. So I went with my cousin, and he's like, yeah, I can teach you, no problem. So we're out in water about, maybe not quite waist deep or whatever, and he's like, yeah, just lay back. You've got a life jacket on, and you'll float. So I said, fuck, that's easy. Why not? So I just flopped over, and I almost drowned to death. I floated about like this far from the surface of the water, and I couldn't find the bottom, because my feet were out, and my arms, obviously I can't touch backwards. So anyways, I was screwed. And so he came running over, and he pulled me up. He's like, what the hell are you doing? I said, well, you told me I'd float. He's like, well, you did, but you're underwater, Yeah, thanks. But last summer, I went to Canada's largest water park in Ottawa. So that was a hell of a thing as well, yeah. Water slides are awful, and this little floaty thing, it was scary as all hell, yeah. 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 Don't tip, right? What do you do? I know if I tip, I'm out. So anyway, it was fun. But anybody? Comments? Yeah, Joan, what's up?
I can say one thing about you. You come through so much. I haven't any questions, but I've got a comment.
Okay.
I believe it's your spirit. You've got the will to keep going no matter what. And so long as you keep that going, man, you'll do fine.
So far, so good.
So far,
thank you.
so
Yeah.
good, and
Yeah.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Keep going, man.
That's the whole thing. Yeah. It's the idea.
Yeah, that's-
It's weird because a lot of you know me for 30 years. Teeswater's a small place, so you've been along for the ride for most of this. And I don't know. I guess there's a lot of behind the scenes, but a lot of you are somewhat aware of everything that's been happening, right? So it's neat to share, and yeah.
Should talk about this in other places too.
I'm working on it. Yeah.
I think it's-
Yeah.
I think it's a-
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You could even write a little book about it.
Yeah, maybe with some
I'm
help. Yeah.
serious, because yeah, that's a lot.
I think maybe I should read a book before I write a book, though, eh? I should probably read a book before I write a book. Yeah. 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 Maybe a coloring book. I don't know. Yeah. Sure. I've done a couple of those. Yeah. Anything else? Comments? Questions? Feedback? Anything? Crickets.
Because you are such a strong spirit, do you find it difficult to deal with the sympathy or like the doctor telling you shouldn't be lifting more than 50 pounds? You find it's hard, like they're bringing you down or
Yeah.
softening?
Doctor stuff, no. Because I understand my body very well, I believe, and even though I don't have any medical background, I've been doing this a long time, so I don't know. I'm very much aware of consequences to things that I'm choosing. Sometimes some of the sympathy stuff gets a little tough because I'm kind of my default setting is to be a little bit direct, and that can be very abrasive, especially when I don't have a significant amount of energy that I care to focus into like communication. So yeah, I mean, because oftentimes they'll address it and say, this must be super hard for you. And I'm like, yeah, well, thanks for fucking bringing it up. It's not like, I'm very much aware, right? I know how hard this is because I'm doing it right now, right? So I can appreciate both sides of the coin in that, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to hold that back, right? I know it's coming from a place of love. I know that I appreciate the thoughts, but some days it's just like, if you had any idea of my morning, I feel like you would take fucking 10 steps back. So it's kind of a double edge, I guess. But for the most part, it's pretty good because especially now, well, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't particularly care, I don't think. But as an adult, I can kind of step back and think, all right, this isn't something to be angry about. But it absolutely brings my awareness straight back to the same thing. And that's frustrating at times because it's like, oh, good. I'm having a good day. I'm feeling progress. And then it's like, let's talk about this for another hour. Like, I really would rather not. And so I have trouble voicing that, I guess, because I'm like, yeah, okay, let's talk about this and whatever. And then afterwards, I'm like, fuck, I wish I didn't do that because it set me back, So, but at the same time, I try to spin that around and I'm like, okay, well, this is just more practice. So, I don't know. It's something I got to get good at because it's not going away. So, it just kind of is what it is. Does that answer your question at all? Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question.
Given the answer you just gave with this talk and probing for more questions, comments,
Yeah.
trying to get rid of the crickets, how much of this will be positive versus more of a drain for you personally?
See, I love it because after every one I've done so far, I've had at least one person tell me, like, thanks so much for doing that. And that much feedback is enough. So whether it's today or whether it's 6 years down the line and you're like, oh man, there's that one thing that dude talked about. Whether you tell me or not, that's the whole point. I feel one of the things I talked about with that older gentleman in my room after my heart surgery is doing these, and we had a lot of really actually good conversations. But he encouraged me. He's like, you have a hell of a story, and it seems like a lot of people could benefit from hearing it. So if you have any interest at all, just go talk a little bit. Go set it up in your hometown. Set it up somewhere. Do it for 5 people. Do it for whatever people. And just try to make one difference. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It took me like a year and a half to start. And another hospital stay absolutely gave me a bit more motivation to do that. But yeah, for me, it's positive in that even if 99% of the room is bored and they go home and think, oh, well, that was a waste of an hour. Like for me, I'm like, probably at least one person would be like, oh, damn, that was a good afternoon, right? And that's really all I care about. So if I can have, like I said, these light bulb moments with people, it makes it all worthwhile. So does that make, yeah? Thanks for the question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good. Success. Gary.
Phil, you sit here and listen to you. A lot of us don't know what we used to have that day. And I'm amazed at your smiling disposition all the time. And
Sure.
how positive you are going through everything you have. Doing what you're doing today is a very difficult thing to stand out in front of your friends and neighbors in your local town.
Sure.
You'd be much further ahead to stand out where you don't know anybody.
It's been nice, yeah.
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 Confidence with
Yeah.
the notes and everything. You've done a marvelous job. You've got a great story.
Well, thank you.
And it's amazing how
I'm working on it, oh yeah, before I forget, I have cards that are in that bag, but they're supposed to be on that table. Anybody that wants one, I'm going to put them out. I encourage you to take one. So before you leave, whenever we're all done here, I will put them over there. So just a little side note, but yeah, no, thank you. I don't know, it's been a hell of a ride, and I figure it's going to keep going. So this is part of the process for me. And a lot of the things that I used to love to do, I can still play music. So I'm participating in a band right now a little bit, trying to get things just for fun. But like powerlifting, like I said, it's not something that's really sustainable. So I haven't been forced to find goals outside of the gym for a lot of years. So this is just one of them. And so, yeah, trying to do some and have fun a little bit. And I'm absolutely terrified of speaking in front of crowds, so it's a test for me. So it's nice that, I don't know if you remember my public school speaking, but it probably was very poor. So, yeah. 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 Anybody else?
Bill, I just see some T-shirts around.
Yes.
Finding Strength, is that, are they for sale?
Yes, they are. So I have some shirts in the back there. I have a donation box. So any of the money that I make doing this, I'm just going to put back into doing some more. I'm hoping to go potentially up to Ottawa sometime this year. And I've got some friends out in Calgary that I might try to go out and do there. So it's kind of my method of somewhat self-funding to try and do some more and see some more people. So they're $25. Yeah, that's a good idea to mention.
They wash really nicely.
Yeah,
They wear well.
they fit. Yeah, we can have a little model. There was a girl dancing earlier. She did a nice spin. It would have been quite. Yeah. Yeah. Bring her back.
One thing I want to mention about when I was down, I was filling up a lot when I was in the hospital. When we were down, we had 5 teams working on them. We had the skin and blood infections.
Yeah, last summer.
And they were not in agreement. So the one doctor came in really good. He came in and goes, all right, we figured this out. This is what we're going to do. We changed the orders. Everything was done. Bill was happy to help. He was still out of it, and he says thank you, please and thank you and everything. Every time he's in the hospital, or anybody comes along, it was just crazy. That's every time something was said, well, thank you very much, or please, or whatever. But this stupid bitch comes in and she's from one team.
Oh yeah, I ripped into her good.
She just walks in. She walks in. She talks to him, leaves, goes to the nurse's station, changes the orders, and leaves. And the nurse comes walking in and said, what'd she say to you? She said, nothing. She just changed your orders. And he looked at her and said, get her fucking back.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know if she'll come back or not. She came back.
No.
And they just started to talk. And this doctor thought she was king shit. She's like,
Yeah.
not 30. And Bill knows his medical stuff.
Yeah.
And he said, that's it. You need to leave. And she looked and she started, I told you to fucking leave. She turned around and left.
Yeah.
Never saw her again. Never saw her again. So
Yeah.
when it comes to medical stuff,
Yeah.
he knows. And part of it, I think, goes back to sick kids. He got burnt underneath his arms 3 times. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. And it's when he was getting his surgery. You're laying there and your arms are like this. And Betadine cleans. But it heats to clean. So it pooled in between his arm and his
Oh,
side.
yeah.
And the one time he was burned
That was
from
brutal.
the underarm to his elbow, on both sides of his arm, and blistered on his
Oh,
arm
yeah.
and his side. So I could be fairly loud and I was pretty pissed. And I'm trying to find out what's going
Yeah.
on. And, yeah, and Bill, and we're just saying like red mark it so that doesn't happen again. So they did, and it happened again. So then I got really mad. And they're not really telling us what was happening. They're just trying to
Yeah, they're pushing it off.
and they're pussyfooting around, and I finally got mad and I said, you're dealing with somebody from fucking Bruce County. You don't have to worry about getting sued, you have to worry about getting fucking hit. Exactly what I said. And everything opened up. They found out it was Betadine that did it,
Yeah.
the red flake, everything, and it never happened again. Like, they pussyfoot around so much about they're gonna get sued. So if you're ever in a position that you need to argue. Another time he had a linogram, and they're injecting shit into his body so they can actually trace this line to see what's going on. And I said, he's like, maybe 8, the year you were 7 or 8. And I said, I'm coming in. You can't go in. I said, I'm going in. And they said, you cannot come in. I said, you don't have big enough fucking security around here to get rid of you. I said, what are you wearing when you're in there? And they said, well, we're putting these gowns on. I said, go get one or don't. I don't care. I'm not going to have any more kids.
Yep.
And I went in. The doctor fucked up. And that's why he was losing his lines.
Yeah.
They actually put heparin in his line instead of saline first. The heparin stops the blood from clotting. Then and it's a small needle. Then he picks up the bigger needle and goes to inject it in. I said, what are you doing? I've got to put this in to flush his line. He said, no, asshole, you did backwards. We flushed his line every day.
Yeah.
So the doctor and I are arguing, and the nurse is right here, and she looked at him and said, can you actually tell him? And she goes, no, he's right. I said,
Yeah.
8 years, we flush his line every freaking day. I know I'm right.
Yeah.
But they make mistakes.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's one reason why he does stand out so well is because, like, he's been doing
I
it.
grew up around it for
When
sure.
When they were kids, when they were that age,
Oh yeah.
they have control of their body.
Yeah.
And they come in and they say something, I said, well, ask him. What do you mean, ask him?
Yeah.
Ask him. Like, well, he has something to say. I said, well, yeah, he does. So he's been doing this literally since
My old-
he first became double digit, 10 years old. He's been actually
Yeah.
hurting his body.
I was flushing my own line. I take my own pills. I've been even when I was a kid. I remember.
6.
Yeah.
Your grandma was
Oh, yeah.
actually getting him to flush his own line at 6.
Even in phlebotomy, like they'd say, oh, you know, you need to hold him down because I go for blood work every time I was in Toronto, and I, 4 years old, and they're like looking at Dad, hold him down. He's like, I'm not holding him down. He's fine. I'm like, no, he's gonna move around. Kids always move. And he's like, he's not gonna fucking move. Ask him. And I'm like, you're gonna move? No. And so I'd put the needle in my arm and whatever. Sometimes I'd cry and stuff, but they'd do it and be like, wow, he's really good. I'm like, yeah, I fucking told you. Like, but
I hear you scream two hallways down.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right?
Would move.
Yeah, and just a reference too.
So if you have something, the worst thing you can do is actually put 10 medical team.
Oh, yeah.
When he was getting his first treatment, they had 10 people in there.
Yeah.
And they're all on him and said, back off. Like he is, but
Let me chill a little bit.
You really do have to stand up for yourself.
There was a clown after my triple bypass when I was 8. So I was at the cardiac units on the 4th floor in sick kids, and they threw a birthday party for me in the the children's playroom, right? And so they brought this clown in, and they had a cake and all this shit. And at the time, like I wasn't even functioning. I was on drugs and whatever. I was in a wheelchair, and this clown came up and he starts tickling me in the wheelchair, and obviously I started freaking out. And so Daddy looks at him straight in the face. He's like, you have fucking 3 seconds to get out of this room or you're going through that fucking window. And he kind of stood up and whatever. And I'm sitting obviously scared as hell and I was in a lot of pain. And it's like, I'm fucking serious. And the guy, he's out. This clown at the children's party, he's like, what the fuck is he doing? On a cardiac unit full of kids with heart surgery, starts tickling the kids. Anyway, that's the attitude. It's very much ingrained in me, especially in the hospital. So you can't take the shit. And I mean, everybody knows what's going on, but especially when you're questioning it, don't be scared to question them because a lot of the times, if they can't tell you why, then there's a problem. So at least if they're right, they can tell you why. And that's really a big takeaway over the years. They're very persistent and stubborn. But you said too, this was the first time you ever heard me swear in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I was, just for reference, it was a rough
You didn't get that from me.
go. Yeah. On the other side, though, after my heart surgery last time, my mom said she never felt more proud because I was just extubated. I was barely awake, and like Dad said, I said thank you very much to my nurse. I said, could you please go do this or whatever? And I don't remember this at all, but Mom, they were sitting there, and she's like, I couldn't believe your mannerisms and your composure. Literally under the absolute worst circumstances. Like I said, I couldn't move. Everything was swollen. I was numb. So that's interesting to me because I don't remember it all, but it's nice that that's ingrained in my mind. So, I mean, if that's everything, I don't know. Don't be shy, but I appreciate everybody coming out. It's not a beautiful day, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for being here. You've got an incredible story, and we're just really fortunate to have experienced that today and to hear your story. It's so true. Like Bill in the gym is like Yoda. He's there all the time.
Yeah.
He knows everything.
I don't know. I'm learning. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're like
Yeah.
next level, and just like always smiling. And then it's another thing I think, you know, when we're, you know, exhausted in a set or something, it's like, well, but then there's Bill. So
But it's not yeah.
so we
Yeah.
can do this thing. We can do this.
I don't
thing
know.
that's hard. We can push ourselves.
There's no such thing as apples to apples in struggles, though. That's the one thing that I find a lot of people, they try to compare, and it's like, I can't complain to you because you've got all this stuff and my stuff's insignificant. But at the same time, it's like my 10 isn't your 10. It's like my headache at 10, if you have a headache at 10, even if mine's way worse, it's not, because we both perceive it to be equally as hard. So that comparison has been something I've actually struggled with a lot, is people feel bad after they hear about some things, and it's like, oh, well, now I'm an asshole. And I'm like, no, just because I've had some stuff doesn't mean that you haven't had stuff, and also doesn't mean that you have any idea what it's been like for me either, because sometimes things don't perceive to be that hard, you know, like, so for example, it's real quick too, when I was walking with my walker all the time, right, we go with Dad, and I was on all the time, but I find a lot of people, you know, everybody's encouraging, they say I'm doing really well, but you get this kind of underlying sympathy tone, right? It's like, oh, well, here's this guy who's been lifting weights for 15 years and now he can't walk, right? So that sucks. But at the same time, like, I'm a 32-year-old man. I'm just a son walking with my dad in the sunshine. Like, what's so hard about that? You know, there's literally nobody gets to experience that. If you were to try and get your parents off work for 3 months and say, every day we're going for 6 walks a day, rain or shine, let's go. Nobody gets to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I did. I don't know, it's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
people are like, oh, this got to be super hard. It's like, well, no, I walk with my dad's pretty fun. So I don't know.
A pretty good day.
Yeah, you know, like, it is what it is. So that perception can be very misleading.
Yeah.
But-
I just love the visual of the rock up the mountain.
Sure.
know,
Oh, thank
like,
you. Yeah.
You dig your feet in, you push your rock up the mountain.
Yeah.
We all have to dig our feet in and push our rock.
Absolutely.
And whatever that means
Yeah.
for any person.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
But I just think it's important not to compare,
Yeah.
or at least to acknowledge that you don't really know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For sharing your story with us today. We have snacks and t-shirts in the
Yeah.
creation station, so make yourself at home.
Yeah. Thank you. It's good to see everybody. Thanks.